Brilliant. Right. Okay. So we'll crack on then and get started. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar today, where we're going to be talking about modern cloud insights. It's based on a report that we've done that we'll talk about a bit more in the slides. So yeah, a little bit of housekeeping just to kick us off. Some introductions. I'm Anthony Norwood. I'm the Azure Cloud Practice Lead here at Echo.
And my name is Jonathan Bailey. I'm a cloud engineer at Echo.
My name's Owen O'Brien. I'm the Director of Global Shared Services or Shared Platforms here in Echo.
And Mikael, my name, and I'm coming in from Echo Security, which is like a sidecar for Echo Cloud. We provide security services, and I'm a Director of Strategy and Innovation.
Brilliant. Thanks all. So a bit more housekeeping. The slides and the recording for this session will be made available afterwards, sent out to everyone who's signed up, and made available to anyone who asks for it afterwards. And we'd really encourage and value your input on today. So if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. There will be time at the end for questions, and we have a couple that people have already sent in that we'll be talking about as well. So brilliant. So a little bit about Echo. Echo is Europe's leading security-first managed services provider with over 2,000 customers across Europe, with more than 860 employees across 4 continents, 300 of them working exclusively in our security arm, and we're delivering across a range of verticals from private, public, and hybrid cloud hosting to backup and DR, allowing us to work with you holistically and deliver successful outcomes. Our teams can integrate with rather than replace your existing structures, which obviously allows your colleagues to drive innovation while we handle all the nitty-gritty BAU stuff. Today's webinar is going to be based on the 2024 Infrastructure Modernisation Report that we publish or will be publishing this week. It's a survey of over 700 leading IT decision makers across West Europe on the state of their existing environments, how they've approached the shift from private cloud to public and hybrid cloud deployments, and whether this shift was meeting their expectations or perhaps where it was falling short. The slide on the screen you can see now just illustrates the broad range of backgrounds that our survey respondents have, which ensures that the findings in the report kind of consider a lot of different deployments, sizes and structures. So makes it really useful. The agenda for today, we're going to talk really briefly about some of the key findings from the report. Won't belabor the points on them because we'll be talking about them in more detail a little bit later on. We'll be talking about some of the motivations for migration into the cloud, how you can deliver a successful cloud project, how you can optimize what's built in the cloud, and then how you can secure what's built in the cloud. And then finally, as mentioned at the end, we'll have a quick Q&A with anything that you guys have for us. So the key findings then are pretty interesting and stark in some ways. Just sort of the first one on here, only 32% of cloud projects of those surveyed achieve all objectives, which means a whopping 68% didn't. That's something we're going to talk about a little bit more about why those kind of things happen. But obviously that's a problem for you and for the projects that you guys are trying to run. 17% feel that their infrastructure is not completely optimized. So there's clearly work to be done there, both in terms of how the projects are initially delivered and then in that ongoing BAU optimization piece. 25% of those that we spoke to felt that the C-suite did not have a strong handle on security, which if anyone watches or reads the news is problematic in this day and age. It's often feels like every other week there's a story about some business that's been victim to some kind of IT-based attack. So all the more important to be present and be aware of those issues and how best to mitigate them. And then finally, but it's a bit buzzy at the moment, 78% are using or planning to use AI for work. Again, it'd be very difficult to not have seen all the news about AI recently, which is just making leaps and bounds every other day by what we see. if anyone's seen any of those videos that they automatically create from last year compared to this year, it's almost indistinguishable now from the real thing. So it's really important then to consider the security aspect of AI and how you can implement that safely and securely in your own environments so that you can get the best out of it while not opening yourself up to any potential issues. So the first section we're going to talk about is moving to the cloud, the motivations for moving to the cloud. It's interesting, you know, a lot of the conversations that we have about moving to the cloud start usually from a place of I want to do better with what I've currently got. And 85% of those that we spoke to are in progress or planning or have completed a cloud modernization project. So it's clearly something that a lot of people are thinking about. And the four key things that people talk and think about when deciding to move to the cloud are on the screen now, and just sort of really quickly to go through them. Number one is they want to improve operational performance. There's this feeling that running workloads in the cloud is better overall for performance. Providing a scalable and future-proof solution by being able to leverage the latest and greatest of what the cloud providers can bring out without the need to go out and purchase brand new hardware yourself. Taking advantage of the various cloud native services and capabilities that are on offer in whichever cloud provider you like to work with. And then finally, the fourth most important thing is just replacing aging infrastructure and legacy systems. You've got that blade sitting in your rack that's a couple of years old now. You're at the point you need to start thinking about replacing it. It's out of warranty. A lot of that's often the starting point for a lot of conversations about should we just move this workload to the cloud instead. Jonathan, I know you've worked a lot on projects of migrating workloads to the cloud. So sort of what kind of conversations are you having, you know, day to day with customers about why they want to migrate?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of customers find that they've kind of stealth adopted the cloud to begin with. So they're already familiar with a lot of the technology that gets used in the cloud, identity providers, that kind of thing, or their mail is a really common one, Office 365. And then also, as we're seeing in these slides, kind of, you know, they've got a rack sitting in the data center and they suddenly decide that they need another office to be able to access it. Well, then they have to get somebody to come in and put a new switch in or put a couple of new routers in so that it's more resilient. And then they can think, well, why are we spending all this money when we could just stick it in the cloud? And then it doesn't matter if we open a new office in Poole next week, they can access it, and we already know that we can sort of agilely expand it. So that's kind of one of the more common kind of things that we hear.
Brilliant. And that brings us quite nicely on to sort of hybrid versus private versus public cloud, which is sort of the three flavors you get these days when it comes to using the cloud. So 65% of those we spoke to are already using the hybrid cloud in 2024. So that's, you know, majority use a mixed case of on-premise and private cloud options. Sort of some of the questions about why would you use hybrid over just one or the other? As all the things we talked about really allows you to replace outdated hardware while keeping your existing still supported hardware. You're able to leverage software as a service much more readily if you're already in the cloud. You can maintain that level of control, especially over if you've got sensitive data that needs to be kept in a predictable location, for example. You know that you can store it on your on-prem data center while your workload, your applications can run in the cloud to deal with that data. And you know, organizations taking a bit more of an ad hoc approach to it. So when it comes to making a decision then and there about where should we deploy this workload, working in the hybrid world, they can decide then, do I want to put it private, do I want to put it public, do I want to put it in my own data center? And they have that flexibility. Owen, as a business, we obviously help customers with each of these three options. When you're chatting to people, what are some of the key inflection points that lead customers to choose one over another?
Yeah, it's similar to what you said. In a lot of cases, they're already moving to the hybrid model by moving their, as John said, like their mail 365 up. It's an easy one. It's a common one. Teams, those type of things. The main considerations for the private cloud is typically around data governance, compliance with if they have government or some sort of industry compliance requirements that they have to keep their data on-prem or in their own private cloud that they have full control over. One of the common reasons that they end up in the hybrid is a lot of customers that we talked to, they would have planned to go full cloud, full public cloud, or and then they discover that actually as a result of cost or a result of when they do their analysis, some of their apps can't run in the cloud. Some of their services, they've got legacy applications that need to run on old servers that the cloud doesn't necessarily, their public cloud or private, or the hyperscalers don't support, and they end up in that hybrid, not necessarily where they originally planned. It comes back to the scope and the business requirements of where they started really, and what their initial decision was to move to, the full public cloud, or and really they're the main. A lot of times it's due to the cost of moving everything up into the public cloud. As they start to move, they realize that some of their workloads are just too expensive to, or they have assets that they still have they sweat their service for 7 years. They still have 4 years left on some of their infrastructure, so they're only moving up the bits that they need, or the hardware that is end of life or is out of warranty, and they're going to continue to sweat the assets for another 2-3 years, and they'll potentially move them up, or as they convert their applications into cloud native, then they'll move them up. And that's typically why a lot of people end up in hybrid, to be honest.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, no one has a set of hardware that all was purchased on the same date, so it's not all going to go out of support on the same date, and it doesn't make any sense to throw away good hardware. So no, it makes perfect sense. Michael, from a security perspective, what are some of the sort of the key considerations if you're considering this question about whether I should go hybrid, private, or public?
So, from my point of view, you really need to look at the skill set you have in-house, right? If you go both, you obviously need to have both, right? So if you want to connect, if you're gonna go hybrid, you need to have a firewall on each side, right? So the communication between those two is properly filtered. Then also the security in the cloud is different as on-prem, right? So think about that, right? I do think that you should go step by step, right? And really think about the security first, but assume or kind of explore what skill set you currently have, right? So you're not like rushing into cloud and then you realize, oh yeah, it's not secure, or we didn't thought about how we're gonna connect the on-prem with the cloud. So that will be the complexity of running two, right? It's almost like the hybrid cars, right? You are running two systems, so there is the complexity there.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that. Brilliant. So in terms of making the switch to the public cloud, then there's a couple of things sort of here about what customers are doing. So there's been a real shift in the approach that we've seen with customer deployments, where it used to be that they would choose to go into a multi-cloud deployment to de-risk the transformation. If Azure goes down, or if AWS goes down, or if GCP goes down, the workloads can fail over to a different cloud provider without the same issue. So that was the kind of the given in how you would deploy your environments in the past. It's very much changed in the last couple of years to really emphasize going deep into a single provider, which will allow you then to gain the benefits of being in that one ecosystem. So the obvious one everyone would talk about is Azure. Of the people that we spoke to, 40% are already using, or over 40% are already using Microsoft Azure for their public cloud deployments. And globally, Azure has a 25% market share, which has been increasing year on year compared to the likes of AWS and GCP and other providers. A lot of that is driven because people are already using the Microsoft ecosystem. They'll already have M365, they'll already have Power BI, they'll already have Dynamics, they'll already have something in the ecosystem, and Azure allows you to integrate with those existing systems almost seamlessly because it runs on the same kind of set of tooling. Also means that if you've got skills in house already in the Microsoft ecosystem, there's not so much of a skills gap between what you would need to have and what you already have. A lot of the administration tooling, is already familiar to you, and it has a robust hybrid cloud capabilities with tools such as ExpressRoute, Azure Arc, and resources such as that. So a very compelling reason to use Microsoft Azure if you're already using Microsoft. And then finally, I'll hand over to talk to someone else, I promise, is, are you already using an MSP? So 31% of the companies that moved to the cloud in our survey used an MSP. The rest of them did it themselves or got an external partner who wasn't MSP in. And of those who are planning cloud modernization projects, only 56% are considering using an MSP. The rest either don't plan to or haven't decided yet. So it's really, really important to sort of consider, full disclosure, obviously we are ourselves an MSP, and we have a lot of skills and knowledge in this area. So we obviously think you should use one. Doesn't have to be us, but I'd like it if it were. So Jonathan, obviously being an MSP ourselves, what do you think some of the biggest benefits are to using someone like us in a cloud modernization project?
Yeah, so as Mikael mentioned earlier, kind of in-house skills are really the kind of or one of the key limiting factors for any organization that wants to move to the cloud. In my previous roles where I've worked for sort of non-MSP enterprise businesses, you kind of deliver a project one time, use a technology one time, document it, make sure that everyone kind of knows what you've done, and then you support it, but you don't deliver it again week on week. And in an MSP, you have a collection of engineers, of technical experts who do that. And sort of every other day we're doing the same work. And so in an MSP, you're kind of fairly good at narrowing down on, what makes this piece of work successful. What did we do good the last time? What do we keep doing? What do we maybe pair off? And that kind of comes down to kind of good project management, really. And it's something that you can leverage from an MSP just to make sure that your project is as successful as it can be. So one of the things I think that you might want to consider when you're kind of starting these kind of migrations, I guess, is how successful the project. What does success look like to you, and how can you deliver the solution that you want to get out of moving to the cloud? So you've got your kind of your motivations there, like why do we want to move to the cloud? Well, what do we want to get out of it, and how can we make sure that we get those deliverables? So a lot of companies, a lot of projects can fail for various reasons, or be viewed as failures, I guess. It's kind of not very black and white, really. Don't ever find that you've kind of deployed something and then, oh, it doesn't work, we'll just bin it all. It's usually, like we see here, it costs more, or you have to hire more people to support it because your two internal IT guys are suddenly spending most of their days supporting this new environment, making sure it's healthy, making sure that users are happy with it, that all the kind of the outcomes are operating as they should. It's gone way over budget, and understanding why that's happened, and then kind of tying all that together, unrealistic expectations. And these are, as you can see from last year's figures, pretty common trends. The costing more than expected is trending upwards, same with budget constraints, which isn't too surprising given the kind of current state of the economy and kind of cloud pricing in general. But a lot of that can be really mitigated, I think, by good project management. And really that comes down to treating the cloud as cloud. We call it like cloud first. So when you're designing a solution, when you're identifying an issue that you need to solve, or a product that you want to utilize, sometimes if it's a SaaS thing, what you really want to do is make sure that you're identifying and using a cloud product and getting a cloud solution. You're not thinking, oh, we used to have this data storage solution in our data center or our office, and we just want a version of that in the cloud, and we kind of want, oh, it used to do this, so we wanted to do that, and that's a really easy pitfall to get into straight off the bat. And basically treating cloud projects as cloud first can really avoid a lot of those problems where you don't expect the cost, or you don't expect the kind of support that's needed, or you're underestimating these things. So always staffing internal resource is kind of the first thing, and that can be a reason why a lot of companies choose to use an MSP, because it's less of a commitment to seek out an expert, a third-party expert, than it is to sort of go through a talent pool, hire somebody on, basically just turn around to them and say, right, deliver this project for us, please, and hope that we don't mess it up. And as Mikael mentioned earlier, security can often be one of the things that drives cost, that isn't budgeted for, that there's no support for because you don't have internal security experts. And certainly in my experience, that's been kind of one of the major kind of failings in cloud projects. So Mika, what are your thoughts maybe on how organizations might be able to make sure that they're building those security considerations into the project lifecycle, and especially at the beginning?
Yeah, I think there is a there is a mix of reasons you mentioned, right? But fundamentally, public cloud or cloud in general, right? It's a mindset change, right? That you need to approach it differently. We even see the attack vector and the speed of attacks, right? If you create a VM in your own data center and it has a public IP, you probably need to wait like a week or month until you have a first scan, right? If you do the same thing in a cloud, we're talking about seconds, minutes, right? Until the first default passwords will try to attempt to log in into those, right? So we talk about the public, right? But you really need to think about what the public means. It is really out there, open, right? And well known, right? That the attackers do know about AWS, GCP, and Azure. They do know about their IP range. They keep constantly trying and scan for those. And as you mentioned, the term kind of coined over the past few years was shifting left, which really means that you should think about security before you deploy, right? It's not like you go in, play around, and say, "Oh yeah, look, I can spin up VM here much faster," right? And then, oh yeah, surely it's secure because it's with Microsoft, right? That's not the case, right? The security features comes at the higher SKUs. So the cost, as you mentioned, Jonathan, right, comes with the security. If you want to implement security, you need to pay extra for those cloud services. People underestimate that in the project budgets. And then also the skill set to apply the security as an afterthought comes at the delays and price of those as well, right? So you could be ready with your project, and then the security review comes in and they find a lot of issues, right? And those are not easy to fix, right? Some of those really need to rethink the design, and they need to go back to the design, and that's where you really have those failings, right? That the business stakeholders say, okay, I don't have a patience for this, right? You tell me cloud be fast, now you're telling me it's working, but it's not secure. I'm confused, and that's where we see a lot of failure, right? So sooner you think about it from the threat modeling, from from the DevOps, from the pipeline, securing all of those, the better for success of those projects.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think one of the kind of security kind of pitfalls, as I've mentioned, is lots of organizations can think that their current setup is secure because they haven't had to think about it too hard. So suddenly when you move to a kind of cloud workload, and you have to think about it all the time, you have to think about it before a project starts, during and after. And it's sort of like that shift in focus to security being so important can kind of make it feel like it's something unique to the cloud, whereas really it's a consideration that you should always have. It's just that you're kind of forced into action, when you move into kind of a public cloud space. And again, setting those objectives. I think the previous slide it showed 68% of objectives are not met according to this survey. And we think about, like, well, why are we not meeting objectives in projects? And usually it's because the objectives themselves are kind of unrealistic, or they're not honest. And it can be difficult if you're not used to delivering cloud projects, if you're not already working in the cloud, to understand what a sensible objective is, what an achievable objective is, and then an affordable objective as well. And you can see here, over half year on year of our survey respondents have had to make compromises in their cloud project. And the top two are scale and cost, and they're very closely interlinked, but they have kind of different implications. In terms of scoping, as we've mentioned, you kind of need to make sure that you're looking at a project and all of the different facets of that project, and what it means. What objectives do you want? What is the scope of your project? What are you delivering, and what's the solution that you want to get out of it? Anthony, you were talking earlier about some of the reasons that organizations move to the cloud. We can see here that scoping is particularly difficult, and doing it accurately can be difficult. What do you think could be done to ensure that expectations are set realistically at the outset of a project before a migration happens?
Yeah, so I think it's two things in my mind, and they kind of lead into each other. The first thing is being aware of what is and isn't included in the public cloud in terms of costings. So, for example, Azure as a key example, it's free for any data that comes into Azure, but you've got to pay for the data that comes out. So if you have workloads that have a lot of data churn that leaves the internal Azure network, you're going to be paying egress charges for that over a certain amount of data that's transferred. So it's really important to understand, and for who you're working with to understand what those, if you like, limitations are, or what those considerations are when it comes to the resources that you want to deploy, and therefore what you need to consider, which then means that you need to have a lot of good data available to you about what your current workloads are doing, or if it's a whole brand new environment, then at least some realistic estimations, so that can all be factored into the price, and that will help people come out with a much more realistic budget, or realistic kind of expectation of what this will look like at the end of it. To Michael's point, a lot of the features that we hear about are great, but some of them do come in at the higher price points for specific services. You've got to pay for premium tiers, or whatever they decide to call it this day. But the point being is that you won't get away sometimes with just using the cheapest option. You do have to pay extra, and that just needs to be factored into the original scoping of the design. If someone says I need this feature, you have to be upfront and honest about, okay, well, it's going to cost this much money. And I think that will help a lot with certainly people's impressions of how the project has gone from a cost perspective at the end of it. They'll say, well, okay, it's expensive perhaps, but I knew it was going to be expensive, so that's okay. And makes people feel a bit happier about that bill at the end of the month, that they knew it was coming.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, one of the kind of common scenarios I think I've seen in terms of a kind of on-prem cost versus a cloud cost is sort of like data storage and high performance data storage. And organizations might have two data centers, and they've got fairly expensive disks that they've provisioned there, and they paid that sort of capital expenditure a long time ago. And they can move data freely in quite high volumes between these two without really incurring any extra costs that they're aware of. They just have those kind of like light hosting OPEX stuff going on. And then as soon as they move to the cloud and they're transferring all this data around, they suddenly see their usage costs go through the roof. And that's one of the ones that as long as you, or we as an MSP, or you as a kind of project manager or a technical lead, as long as you're aware of kind of all of the different facets of how a technology is delivered, then you can predict that and you can make sure that it's in your objectives. We want a certain amount of usage, and we want to make sure that we're delivering exactly the correct solution to kind of minimize cost and optimize performance. And we see here, budget and cost management is really one of the kind of the top focus points for moving to the cloud. And often, somewhat ironically, it's one of the reasons lots of organizations want to move to the cloud, and then they get there and they realize that they haven't really ran the project correctly, they haven't scoped it correctly, and it's sort of like dipping your toe in too hot a bath, where you have to pull out straight away, and then you end up spending a lot more money, kind of doing this sort of strange hybrid thing. I think Owen mentioned it earlier, where you'll move a small part, and if you're not doing it properly, you just end up in this kind of hybrid environment for years and years and years, where you're replacing kind of pieces as you go in an ad hoc way, rather than kind of planning it out and carrying that life cycle. So this kind of budgeting thing, having a budget set out at the beginning of a cloud project, not really obviously you should have the budget, you should have the funds, you should know what you're going to spend, but in the old days you used to sort of ring fence, say 100 grand, and say, right, we're going to get some new hardware in our data center, and it's going to do X, Y, and Z, and it needs to do those things for 5 years. So we need to make sure that this 100 grand goes as far as it possibly can. And in a cloud project, you kind of more want to look at, well, what's going to be the operational cost of running, say, an ideal solution for 6 months? And in those first 3 months, we get all the data that we need for performance, for usage, for access, concurrent usage as well. Can users actually access it? Sorry, can your customers get at it if it's a B2C thing, or a customer facing portal, for example? And then after that amount of time, you can kind of look back and assess and adjust, and that's kind of the power of the cloud. There's this adjustment that you can make as a project is delivered. So it's never complete, handed over, commissioned, and done. It's always subject to kind of constant review. And this sort of, again, cloud projects 61% overran or were significantly delayed. And I think you have to think about what does it mean to deliver a cloud project and to finalize a cloud project. Well, the solution is live, but that isn't the end of the kind of project team's involvement. Certainly not from the MSP side. There's a sort of BAU handover for sure. But then that review is kind of constant. You should always be looking at it. Are we operating inside the parameters that we originally set? Are we agile enough? Can you scale this up or out as you need to? Has it been designed well enough? And that's kind of one of the things that we kind of look to do as much as possible. Given the kind of the focus here on costs being the kind of major stumbling block for projects, Owen, you've got some thoughts on kind of the overall optimization of the cloud that you're going to be talking about shortly. But what are some of the other reasons do you think that costs can be higher than expected, other than kind of security and this kind of like slow fritter that I was talking about?
Yeah, to be honest with you, we've covered a good chunk of them, right? So it's people underestimate the amount of, I suppose, or the time that it takes to deliver these types of projects. In a lot of companies that I would have dealt with over the years, big and small, and I'm talking about from multinationals down, when we talk about moving to the cloud, it was treated as a purely technical exercise, I would say. So everyone goes, oh, it's just the same as building our CapEx stuff. Same as building in the data center. It's no different. But actually, there's a huge business transformation required as part of this. And a lot of, particularly business leaders, don't understand that, and it's not explained to them enough at the start that this isn't just a pure technology replacement. It's going to impact how our processes run, how all of that works within our business across the whole remit of how we work. So 17% this year, which is down slightly from last year, believe that their IT infrastructure is optimized. And the main areas, one of which is that if we compare them with security, cloud monitoring, cost, and speed, cost didn't appear last year. It was the concern last year was shadow IT, whereas cost has moved up to number 3 this year. And a lot of that, I suppose, the security side, some examples, there were only 79% of people were concerned about their cloud security. That they didn't have the required either skill sets in house or that they weren't configured securely. So I'm not going to go into that. I'll let Michael handle that later on, right? The next one then was around the cloud monitoring piece. Sorry, you could just stay on that slide quickly for a second. So the cloud monitoring piece, this isn't just about what we're doing in the cloud. This was all around how our cost optimization is happening in the cloud, how we get an overview of. So it ties in 2 and 3 tied in a lot. 2 and 3 tied in a lot. So cloud monitoring was around the cost. What are we doing? Where's my cost? What are we running? Why are we running it? Traditionally, if you think in an on-prem environment, so we had, I don't know, 6 servers, a SAN, a couple of switches, a firewall. If I needed to spin up a VM for testing, I just spun it up. It ran. If it ran for a month, didn't make any difference. I was paying for the hardware anyway. Right? But when you move to your cloud model, you're being charged for consumption. So leaving that VM on overnight when it's not doing anything is costing you money. Leaving the developers that go and spin up random massive VMs when they don't need them, costing you money. So it's about the optimization piece is about understanding what those requirements are, putting the processes and in place within your organization to control what people are turning on, turning off, to automate where possible what we turn off when we don't need it. So those developer VMs, they might only need to be on 9 to 5. They turn off automatically at 5 o'clock unless there's a specific reason. This is all the type of optimization that needs to be done and needs to be understood. It gets back to a lot of the reasons that the projects fail. So when we go into the run, so the project hands over into our runner, how we optimize what we do on a day-to-day basis. A lot of it comes back to either not enough business involvement at the start, defining the requirements, the business not understanding what the requirements on them are going to be as part of this. And as a result, your design then doesn't match what you want. So the business has this great idea at the start, we're going to move to the cloud, it's going to save us money. It's something that's sold to them in that way without understanding the amount of investment that they need to put in to explain what they need to get out of the cloud. Because when it was on-prem, it didn't matter. You paid your CapEx and you just ran it. But now every decision you make about what you run, where you run it, why you run it, what you keep, whether you need to run that VM with 12 CPUs and a terabyte of memory, like that, those didn't matter before. They do, and they absolutely impact on your cost every month. And it makes it much harder then to budget and to allow for what your costs are going to be. I would say from the survey, only 33% of people said they have full visibility of what their costs were in the cloud. So that obviously is a problem. If 67% don't actually know what their costs are, again, it comes back to why the projects fail, because people assume costs and then they realize they're way higher than they actually need to be. Fragmentation of data becomes a big challenge if you're not optimized. So you've got data duplicated, some of it's in SharePoint, some of it's on your.
Oh, sorry, and we've lost you back now.
From a security perspective, it's an absolute nightmare. Because you no longer know where your data is. Your data governance, your data reporting, all that becomes really complicated if you don't have that all optimized. So this is also that needs to come into your planning for your project before you even get near your optimizing and running later on. It needs to be a key part of your project at the start, your design, how you're going to run, how your data is going to be, where it's going to sit, where your data governance, who's going to be responsible for it, your security services, all that should be thought of at the start. Typically what the guy said earlier on, if you think on-prem, you have your hardware and data center or in your local data room. Typically that's all behind a firewall. You might have 2 sysadmins working on it. Security wouldn't be their focus. When you go to the cloud, you absolutely need that skill set. And if you just click to the next one, you'll see that 67% of I believe 63% of companies said they have gaps in their skills. But of those 63%, like of the 63% respondents, only 30 odd are actually going to use an MSP. So this is where organizations need to figure out how to fill that gap. So to highlight importance of business involvement, leveraging the experience and insights of both the team you have and an MSP if you're using one, you absolutely need to look at your cloud operating model, and it needs to be done at the start, not at the end, but reviewed. As Jonathan said, after 3 months, if you don't have any idea what your data ingress egress costs are going to be, what the data transit is within your current environment, that needs to be reviewed. You need to have a hard review set after 3 months. And it's not a case that just whatever your costs are month 1, you multiply them by 12 and say that that's what it's going to be, because that absolutely won't work for you. You need to allow your employees to develop. A lot of employees that might be purely on-prem now, they need to have the time and ability to skill up. And then, I suppose, championing business outcomes. At the end of the day, any of these migrations or any cloud first policy, anything like this, it's all about how we can develop or how we can deliver back for the businesses that we're all involved in. All right. So really, I suppose I've talked a lot, probably quite quickly, the habit of speaking very fast around the projects and the BAU post project. And like I said, the number one area is security. Because what would you say be the quick wins for businesses in the security area?
Thanks, Owen. So I think the good thing about the cloud is that you are really using state-of-the-art technology, which is constantly changing, right? And it is very easy to apply features which you couldn't do on-prem, right? I think we went into a bit negative mood here, right? But to be a bit more positive here, right? you are not comparing like to like. Like cloud is really the state of the art, constantly changing, easy to apply, low-hanging fruits, and it's almost like you're comparing like energy rating house A1 versus something which was built 20 years ago, right? Or even in housing terminology, 100 years ago, right? You're not comparing like to like. You have a full API capabilities. You can apply security. You can change the infrastructure pretty fast if it's not secure. And you can also pull the logs very efficiently, which you couldn't do on-prem, right? So one quick win probably is something which I keep asking people, about the security and monitoring. How much you invest into physical security to kind of guard your offices or your warehouses, and so on and so forth, versus how much you invest into monitoring your data and assets, right? So that is really the question. And then going into your strategy, right? What is your security strategy? Because cybersecurity changed a lot 2 years ago with the first LLM models and the kind of rise of AI, and everybody can now play around and ask, okay, show me how to attack a company, and then the ChatGPT will answer you, right? Or reverse this code and ChatGPT will answer you, right? So, the traditional landscape change, right? Where you have a lot of manual and sophisticated attacks before. Now you have a masses of different type of attacks, which are automated. They're coming from emails, then they're linked to the cloud. They're trying to social engineer and scan dark web for your passwords, and then try to get into and reuse them on your cloud, right? So you really need to have a strategy. I think that's one thing, and look how you are protecting the digital assets. We see the compliance is stepping up the game as well, right? You do need a PAM solution now, which you didn't need before. It's harder to get cyber insurance, or the premiums are going up if you don't have a proper controls, if you don't have a SOC. To build a SOC, do you really want to build like 24/7 coverage? Because the internet never sleeps, right? It's not like in New York City. And do you really want to go that direction when you're going to have a pool of 40 people, or is it easier to outsource this piece? The AI, I call it the cloud 20 years after. It's really a drive what we see here to go to cloud as well, because it's very hard to use the LLMs when you are on-prem. I'm not saying it's not possible, but you can see based on the NVIDIA stock, right, that it's very expensive to get those chips and build it yourself, right? We see the same trend as we seen with the cloud. People go in and play around the cloud, and then they didn't think about the security. They just want to show the business how they can operate quickly there. We see the same thing with LLMs and AI, where people go in and play around those and create the use cases, but they don't think about the security. So it's going to take us years to secure the AI after, same as it's taking us years to secure the cloud, right? So I think on the positive note, these are all problems we can solve. As Owen said, this is not a technology issue. This is processes and people issues. And if you don't want to build your own processes, then it's obviously better to look at the service managed service option. The bad news is that because this is moving so fast and the skill set is so rare, it's very hard to understand what actually needs to be done and where, right? So to quantify the risks and see, okay, like even this week, right? We found out on large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, there are browser plugins now which claim to be LLMs, and they enable you to record any calls which you join from browser and do the full transcript of them, right? Which is in complete breach of all, data protections and all the different privacy regulations, right? but you don't even know about it, right? You don't know that the call is recorded. So you basically need to go in and block all the browser plugins, which is not an easy task, right? But suddenly, from 1 week to other, you are non-compliant just because the technology is advancing. So careful about AI. That's my thing. There are a lot of concerns around the AI. Careful about the cloud, but think about it from the other side. This is a state-of-the-art technology, and we can always adapt. We can add the security layers on top of it. And I think I will start with the simple, right? Understand what you try to achieve, see if there is any risk, and then if there is a risk, if it's a risk due to lack of skills, because you do it first time, as Jonathan said, and you're only gonna do it once and never again. Do you really need to build those skills? Or if it's because it's a lack of processes. So people just did something, but then they hand over to someone and the second person doesn't know what to do, right? Or it's fundamentally around the technology, which I doubt it is, right? As always, but sometimes it is just bad technology, right? And then you can replace it. On that note, I know everybody's hungry. We only have 30 minutes before the lunch break. So any questions?
We've got a little bit of housekeeping as well. Just really quickly before we get on to the questions. Obviously, the full report that we've been talking about today will be released in the next week, which has more detail, more insights, and more statistics to chomp on. And also, we've obviously talked a lot about Azure today. That's something that we specialize in as a business. So we'll be launching a monthly roundup of news from Microsoft about the latest and greatest new updated upcoming capabilities in Azure. So if you're interested in finding out that, we promise not to spam you with anything. It's just this one thing, and then let us know, and we'll get you subscribed to it. So yeah, so and also obviously thanks Michal, thanks Owen, thanks Jonathan for all your insights and contributions so far. So for questions, I haven't seen anything come in, but we do have some that people sent in before. So Jonathan, perhaps maybe you could talk about how do you actually manage cost in the cloud? Like what kind of tooling would you use to manage that cost once you're there and you're in that kind of operational mode? What are you doing to make sure it's in control?
Yeah, so there's two things, or two primary things I would say. So the first one is good monitoring to make sure that you understand exactly what it is, as mentioned earlier, Owen was talking about, that you understand exactly what it is that your infrastructure is doing. Is it in use 24/7, for example? Does it need to be, so on and so forth? And then the second is comparing your pricing. You can break down the bill. Nothing is hidden in the cloud. Everything that you're billed for in Azure is kind of broken right down to each kind of service. And so if you understand that your infrastructure is running in the way that you want it to, then you can match up those costs fairly easily. In terms of making a kind of prediction for how much you might spend, it's kind of easy to plug something into the Azure pricing calculator and think, yeah, that'll be fine. This looks okay. But you really need to make sure that you're considering like that full 24/7 months out use case whenever it is that you're anticipating a price. And probably what we tend to do is be realistic. You don't need to go way over. You want to be accurate when you're making these predictions, but possibly overestimate by 10% when you're using the kind of pricing calculator to get a more realistic idea. Because there's lots of things that you might not be aware of. But really, you don't need to use too many third-party tools as long as you've got those kind of basic things, the access to your bills and the pricing calculator, and you're monitoring, you can kind of keep all these in check fairly easily.
I think it's also worth mentioning, certainly in terms of that pricing calculator, which is something I use all the time, to remember that everything at Microsoft, and I'm going to say I assume it's the same for AWS and GCP and the other providers, everything is priced in dollars and then converted to your local currency. So it's really important to remember that currency fluctuations can make a difference in your bill if you're billing in something other than dollars. So, just something to keep in mind when you're going through these projects. If 1 month or another month it's different one way or the other, and there's been a massive currency fluctuation, that could possibly be why it might not be any change in how you've used those resources. So always a fun conversation to have with people.
Oh yeah.
Cheers, Jonathan. Owen, if you could if you had to pick one thing we've talked about today that what makes a successful project, what would be the one thing you would focus on to make a project successful?
For me, it would absolutely be defining your business requirements at the start. Absolutely, it's the key. It's why projects overrun. It's why the business isn't happy afterwards when they move. It's because those requirements aren't agreed up front. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's something we see all the time. That person will come out the woodwork right at the end and go, "Have you thought about this?" Like,
Yeah.
no. What
Yeah,
workload?
all the time.
It happens all the time. No, thank you. And then finally, I appreciate the time has got away with us. So final kind of prepared question that we had from before the call, which is for you, Michal. In your experience, in your opinion, from what you've seen, sort of what are the top 3 easiest security mistakes businesses are making? Like, what are the things they're just completely blind to?
So I think infrastructure as a code, it's one which traditional security people don't have expertise. They don't naturally write a code. We've seen a lot of misconfiguration there. So we've seen deployment of the code from dev environment where they forgot to comment something in the code, and suddenly the whole production was open to public, right? The kind of pipeline and the agile version of the cloud is also something which is not natural, right? That the fact that you keep releasing twice a day, it's not the traditional model where security is reviewing a release before it goes. So the dynamic version of it. In general, we see a shift, right? We see that the young security professionals have a different mindset. So they tend to kind of coming in from the dev background as well. But that's something which definitely is changing, right? It's a good news for everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I know it's something we use infrastructure as code internally as well. So we're having those discussions, we're having those thoughts about how to keep that kind of stuff secure as well. It's only right that customers are doing it too. So brilliant.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any other questions.
Misconfiguration, sorry there, Anthony, right? Misconfiguration of cloud is also one which pops in the mind a lot, right? People do mistakes when they do changes. If the change management is not proper, it happened to the best of us. I seen clusters to be deleted accidentally when there is no log protection. One of them happened on the 1st of April when they ring me. I thought it's a joke. It wasn't. They wiped the whole cluster of a major bank. Right. So that's also some stuff which you need to prevent the manual misconfiguration. That's going to happen. But as I was saying, the speed of cloud is way different than on-prem. So you're going to get punished in seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. As I haven't seen any other questions come in, so we'll give everyone 5 minutes back. Thank you everyone for joining, and again, thanks everyone for contributing to today's talk. If you have any questions or anything as a follow-up, do feel free to reach out. We'll be more than happy to have conversations with people about what we've talked about, or about how we as a business can help you as a business kind of get you on that journey into the cloud, or to help kickstart what you've already got going. So thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Brilliant.
Thanks for joining. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Bye.